Hi everyone, this is Shirley from Shirley's World, and I'm going to do part 3, I think, of a series I'm doing on growing up in the 40s and the 50s. I was born in 1942. This video is going to be about what I remember about the meals we ate, the food back then, and about wartime rationing, because rationing started in May of 1942, which just happens to be the month I was born. So I thought I should talk about that. Now, I have to say that when we were growing up, it was during wartime, part of it, and food rationing went on for strongly till the 45, but it actually went to the early 50s. So I have to say that we did not, as children, we did not even notice. We weren't told anything about rationing that I remember. I'm not sure if I remember my mother's rationing books that she took to the store, or whether we were just too young to remember that. But we were never told that we couldn't eat something, or things were, we didn't have much food. We thought that everything was normal. We didn't think we were poor, which we weren't. We were, I would say, I don't know, middle class, maybe slightly lower middle class. And my father worked in a factory, but he had a job. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom. So as children, we thought it was just our normal childhood. So growing up in the 40s, in the mealtime, we always ate together. That was the big main thing back then. We always ate dinner together. We had a very small kitchen. In fact, I remember the kitchen table, we had to pull it out from the wall in order for the fourth person, well, really the third and fourth person, to fit at the table, because it was shoved back against the wall under the windows. And yeah, so not a very big table, but it was the table we used our whole life in this house. So meals, breakfasts consisted of usually orange juice or some sort of fruit, and I don't know, cereal. I remember having cereal back then. I remember having maybe oatmeal, eggs sometimes. I don't remember often having bacon, but I think that's one of the things that might have been rationed, because I think meat was rationed. Now, not all meat, but I think bacon was one of them that was rationed. Rationing went on because the canned goods and the things that they were rationing was saved for to send to the soldiers in Europe. So it was shipped overseas. And the things that we could have was of short supply because of the war. A lot of things were shipped in from overseas. Well, that wasn't happening. So things were, short supply. And you'll never guess, the first thing that was rationed was sugar. That was the first thing rationed in 1942. So you got, I guess they got this book, this rationing book. I'm going to try to, I don't have one that I saved, but I'm going to try to find some pictures of these things in stock photos. If I can find them, I will insert them. but rationing, it was like a book of stamps, and you got to spend so much per month. I think they got a book every month. But once you spent that, once you got your allowance of sugar, that was it. You couldn't get it again. Yeah. Other things that were rationed, canned goods, metal. Now, that goes along with the canned goods. So metal was also rationed. I'm reading off a list here, so that's why I'm looking down. Coffee. Coffee was rationed. Another thing that was sent overseas to the soldiers. Meats, certain meats, fats. So housewives were, they saved grease. They saved, if they had bacon, they saved the bacon grease always. And they saved like chicken fat to use as oil. Yeah, butter was rationed. Cheese. I do remember that. I remember my mother getting these big blocks of cheese. And cheese was rationed, and eggs were rationed. Now, we didn't have eggs that often, but we did have things made with eggs once in a while, like waffles or pancakes, but not that often. Yeah, our meals were small. Maybe as a child I don't remember that, but that's what I've been reading. The meals were smaller, and that was because of the food rationing. Yeah, other things that were rationed back in the 40s, gasoline. Also, you couldn't just go buy a car. You had to make an appointment and get permission to buy a car. So tires, because rubber and tires were of short supply because the factories that made cars were taken over to make vehicles for the war. So there weren't many cars being made. As far as clothes, shoes, I think the leather maybe, silk, nylon. There was a short supply. There was a short supply of fuel oil and even firewood. So people that lived in the country, of course, they had on their property, if they had a lot of trees, they would use their own firewood. But if you didn't, and you needed firewood in the city, that was another thing that was in short supply. Things not in short supply are not rationed, but they were in short supply, were fruits and vegetables. Yeah, that's, and also whiskey and cigarettes, they weren't rationed at all. People were encouraged to make gardens of their own, just like today. They were called Victor Gardens, and I remember we had a Victor Garden. It wasn't on our property. I think it was a garden that several people had this plot of land, or maybe the city, they could use it. It was not far from the house. I remember my father taking me sometimes when he would go and, take care of the garden. And that was the Victor Garden, and it grew vegetables, not so much fruit where we lived, but yeah, vegetables. And my father, of course, came from a farm. He was a farmer's boy, and so he knew a lot about gardening. So now our uncle, my father's brother, owned a farm in Springfield, East Springfield, Pennsylvania, and he had a farm of 100 acres of apples. It's a big apple orchard, but there was other land too that they grew lots of vegetables and things. So I don't think we were in short supply of any fruits and vegetables. We always had apples for sure. Yeah. There was a poster I saw online. There was a poster. It said, "Save the wheat, help the fleet, eat less bread." So sliced bread was in very short supply. I'm not sure if it was rationed. It just wasn't available. So, you know, people made bread at home, but I do not remember my mother making bread, which is kind of strange. I remember she made other raised like yeast things. I mean, she made cinnamon buns, wonderful, delicious cinnamon buns. But I don't remember her making loaves of bread. Now, she might have, that I just don't remember. But my sister doesn't remember that either. So what rationing meant to a housewife was there had to be very good meal planning. We had a family of 4, Mom, Dad, and there were 2 daughters, us, my sister and I. So we had to eat, and my mother, we always had meals. We always had 3 meals a day. Now my father ate his meal at work. My mother packed him a lunch. It's probably some sort of bread because she made sandwiches. So I'm not sure about the bread situation. But maybe you could get bread. It was just rationed, and they were very careful with it. But my father took his lunch every day, and he was 1 cup of coffee. I think in the very beginning, coffee was only, you could only have like 1 cup a day. I think it was rationed that tightly. So, yeah, I'm not sure where my father chose to have his 1 cup of coffee, whether it was in his thermos at work or whether it was with dinner or breakfast. But, yeah. Now, I remember we had instant coffee available at the house. Now, I don't know what years that was in, but you'd think that would be rationed too, but maybe not. But pretty much I remember meals. I remember having Spam. I don't know if I mentioned this in another video, but when my mother would make a can of Spam, and you know the size of a can of Spam. Okay, she would get it out of the can, and she would score the top like a crosshatch, and she'd put a little brown sugar and butter on the top. Very sparing, only a little bit because those were both rationed things. And then put it in the oven and heat it up, because Spam is already pre-cooked, but you had to heat it up, and it made this wonderful sweet topping on the top. And that was a meal for the 4 of us, Spam. Of course, we had potatoes. Now, potatoes were not rationed. So that's another thing that people planted a lot of. Yeah, potatoes. So we had potatoes of some sort, and always had a vegetable. And we always had dessert somehow. Even though sugar was rationed, somehow my mother figured out how we would have some sort of a sweet dessert. And to this day, I don't feel like my meal is finished until I have something sweet at the end. So, yeah, that's what I remember rationing and about our meals. One thing I do remember, I remember one of our neighbors who was an Italian lady, had two daughters, and my sister was best friends with one or both of them. But she had chickens in her backyard. It was in the middle of the city, a city neighborhood, and she had chickens. So I assume you were allowed to have chickens. And yeah, I'm sure she slaughtered her chickens, and she got eggs from her chickens. So we didn't have chickens. She's the only one that I knew that had chickens in and around the neighborhood. But yeah, I don't remember anybody else at all having them. But I do remember the Victory Garden, and I do remember something about rationing books, but I don't remember seeing them, to tell you the truth. I'll try to insert some pictures because, like I said, I don't have any pictures of us around the table. I hunted for pictures through my old pictures, and there weren't many pictures back then. We didn't have cameras like they do now. So that's pretty much what I remember about food and about... I do remember something about waffles. My mother had a waffle maker. Okay, it was a big waffle maker. It was like, it was about this big around, and it was electric, and it was silver, and she would pour the batter. Sometimes we'd have waffles for supper, and this is during supper. She'd make the waffles at the table, and she'd pour the waffle, the dough or the waffle batter into the waffle maker and close the lid and wait a certain amount of time. And then you had to peek, because there was no digital readout or anything. And when she thought they were ready, she would open the lid, and every single time they would stick, and she would get so mad, and she'd have to scrape them off of the waffle maker, and we'd have these waffles. They were done, but they had stuck to the waffle maker. So we had pieces of waffle, and you were allowed to have molasses. I don't think molasses was one of the sweeteners that was not rationed. Maple syrup was rationed. So if we had any, it was just a little bit with a little bit of butter. So we had margarine, which I learned to hate margarine. I hated the taste of margarine. And to this day, I never get margarine. But yeah, I remember she had it back then. That's what they had. So yeah, I remember those dinners with the waffle maker at the table. Pancakes weren't so bad because they were done on a griddle on the stove. My mother had a gas stove, regular, kitchen stove. But I remember back then, you would have to light the burners with a match. You'd turn on the gas and then put a match to it, and it would light. So those were the old stoves. Yeah, and the refrigerators were very small as far as the freezer goes. There was the refrigerator. They were probably about as tall as me. Small refrigerator, and the freezer part was just one little box with a door on it. So you didn't have much freezer space at all. So my father, I remember he had rented a freezer space. It was down more toward into the city, and other people rented space in there too. and you had like a locker where you would put things. And at one point, now I don't know what year this was, but at one point, my father had bought like a half a cow or a large amount of beef, and it was packaged up like from the meat plant in white paper, and that's where he stored it because there was no room, of course, in our freezer or at home. So I remember going with him. I can almost remember the smell of the cold. It was the smell of the cold when he would open the door to this freezer area, and then you'd walk in and you'd go to your space. So yeah, things I remember little bits at a time. So I'm just trying to insert things as I remember. I don't want to edit this very much, so there's going to be mistakes in here. But also, I am so bad at looking at the lens. I keep looking at the screen. I'm sorry about that. I will try to remember. I should put a big arrow there. But that's what I wanted to tell you about in this series. I'm not sure if this is number 3 or number 2. It might be 2. But yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today. So the next one, I will pick another topic, and I will be back to talk to you about that. So please subscribe. I'm trying to build up this YouTube channel. It's very difficult. I haven't had any viral videos for sure to help me jump up. So yeah, please subscribe and hit the like button, and please share, because it's the only way to get this, share it with your family or anybody else that grew up in that age. They'd like to see these. And yeah, I will be back to talk about more of the 40s and the 50s. So thanks for watching. Bye.